So, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're all very welcome to this latest session of the Knowledge Hub at the Summit of the Americas. First of all, I really hope you enjoyed the conversation we had about an hour ago with Dallas Fort Worth Airport CEO Sean Donoghue. If you missed it, we'll be showing it across our channels again very soon. And of course, like all the sessions at this event, you can pick it up on demand. And really, what a compelling and positive message about the future of our industry I found from a leader in the US aviation market. So if you haven't caught up with that, make sure you do later this week or today. Now, for this event, as well as speaking to airports, airlines, retailers, and brand owners, we wanted to ensure we heard the voice of the traveler too. And I'm delighted to say that in this session, we're going to get a handle on the traveler's view of our sector, courtesy of popular travel website, The Points Guy, which has its finger on the pulse, of course, of the travel market in the US and further afield. Scott Meyerowitz is Executive Editorial Director of The Points Guy, overseeing its news, aviation, features, points and miles, and credit card coverage. And Scott has also worked for the Associated Press and previously spent 6 years covering the airline and travel industries for AP. So, Scott, we're very pleased to welcome you here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to talk about travel.
Now, to begin, I suppose just to get your own viewpoint, can you give us maybe a snapshot of where you think we stand today in the Americas air travel market and what shape you think recovery is going to take and the dynamics that are going to drive it?
Sure. I mean, every time I seem to predict something, the world throws a curveball at me, and the predictions are wrong, but I'll go at it. So this is going to be a rebound driven by leisure travelers. I think that's pretty clear if you look just in the United States at daily throughput at the security checkpoints. We're at about 1.5, 1.6 million passengers a day. Where that stood in the past was about 2.6 million. And during the days of the pandemic, you were about 200,000. So what's clearly happening here is leisure travelers are out in force. People are ready to travel, especially those who have been vaccinated or are about to be vaccinated or are booking things for, your summer holidays. That gap between the sort of 1.6 and 2.6 million, that's the business travelers. And those folks are mostly not coming back on the road yet. I sort of talk about return to office. You need people in offices to visit before you can make a sales call. You need restaurants open for dining before you can take a client out for drinks and dinner. And I don't think we're quite there yet. Personally, I've started to take some of my contacts out for outdoor meals in New York City. I am fully vaccinated now myself, and that has given me that ability to sort of have a little bit more freedom. Some places you see it's like COVID doesn't exist and you have large outdoor gatherings and people don't seem to care. But for most of the world yet, there still is that hesitancy. So I think you're going to start seeing phases. And this summer is going to be an incredible summer for leisure travelers, I think, in the Americas. For Canadians, I think it's going to be mostly domestic. For Americans, mostly domestic, plus Caribbean and some Central American destinations. And then South America, it's going to be country by country. I mean, Brazil still has a very long fight ahead of it with COVID. I don't see tons of travel coming there. After the summer is when I think business travel will start to come up. And then you'll start to see that also with transatlantic and hopefully trans-Pacific flights going. And that's really going to depend nation by nation. The UK and many of the EU countries are still not rolling out vaccines as fast as we would like that to see. If that can happen quickly over the summer, you're going to probably see country by country opening up. And that will be definitely hopefully, like how I hedged that for the fall with business travel.
Yeah. And do you sense, in terms of the, I guess, the consumer mindset overall, that really that confidence is returning, as a mirror of the rollout of vaccines, that people's confidence in the travel experience is boosted by the fact that, hey, I've got my vaccine, I can go now? Is that the main factor you think that'll underpin that growth in terms of leisure, visiting friends, and so on, domestic travel?
I think there are two audiences out there. There are folks like me who have not been on a plane for 13, 14 months. And I was waiting for the vaccine. Um, I don't see travel as essential in my life, even though I used to live out of airplanes and hotels and love that part of my life and miss it. And then you see people who are just fed up and saying, I'm taking my chances and I'm going out and traveling anyway. And they've been traveling for the last year, but now they're doing it with more frequency. And I think both of those groups are going to continue to travel more and more. And any stigma attached with travel is going to quickly erode away by this summer, in addition to more and more people being vaccinated. So that will increase the comfort level. There'll always be some holdouts, but as we get through the summer, people will feel much more comfortable with the idea of traveling. And I think that will help ease the way for business travel too, for those who want the business travel. Those who hated it, but their bosses forced them to, are going to have a good, legitimate excuse for several months to avoid work trips.
Yeah. And I suppose in the industry that we work in, that customer mindset is top of mind all the time. And what do you think has been the impact of COVID on that traveler mindset? And I mean, in particular, how they want to book travel, engage with the services at airports and airlines, and even transact.
I think those travelers who are coming back are so excited to do so. There's a little bit of nervousness that's still around them, and it's up to the industry to make them feel safe and secure. So I was having a conversation with someone at an airline the other day, and I say, yeah, I don't think the word disinfecting is what people care about these days. They want clean. And if I find cookie crumbs on my tray table on an airplane, I immediately say, all right, what else is here? Did someone sneeze on this tray table before me? How disgusting is this? Is it a virus? What am I going to get sick with? Am I going to get a common cold from that? I don't think travelers are so much in that disinfectant, wearing gloves, having the face shield on mode anymore. I mean, there still are plenty of people who fly like that, but I think it's more of a general mindset of I want to see things clean and I want space. So take a typical newsstand, gift shop in an airport, selling T-shirts, snacks, newspapers, magazines, bottles of water. I think a traveler who comes into one where it's more spaced out is going to feel much more comfortable than going into the traditional shop where every square meter was filled with merchandise. And that little thing is going to be a psychological signal to travelers that, hey, we're not crowding people in. We're making sure that you're keeping a little bit distance. But also, you got to make sure that the bookshelves are dusted every day. Little things like that are going to be triggers in the traveler's mindset, much more than plastic shields up at cashier stands or hand sanitizer every 5 feet throughout the airport. Yes, they still want those things, but I think they're going to want those other signals much more throughout their experience. Same with restaurants. The last thing I want to do is approach a restaurant where there's a giant line at the bar or people waiting. I would much rather put my name down through an app or get a buzzer and be able to distance myself from the restaurant and come back. And that those are going to be the businesses within the airport terminals that win back customers first.
Yeah, I would say, to be fair, certainly, the retailers that we would speak to, and food service providers, that's very much been top of the mind from the beginning. Is that cleanliness and safety of the environment overall, because they recognize that that's first in the traveler's mind. So I think overall the industry's doing a reasonable job of that. I would say perhaps also, the unfamiliarity of the new travel experience perhaps is at least a short-term barrier, but one that might become a longer-term one, depending on the different rules and regulations that are imposed, and whether we get agreements over digital safety passes and health passes for people. And I guess as an international community, aviation has got to look at that very closely, and we're a long way away from that already. Is that a concern for you?
It's a major concern for me. So what I'm seeing are a lot of governments, including, mine here in the United States, that's saying this is not a government thing to mandate. We're not putting out passports. IATA seems to be taking the lead here, although there are several other competing digital passports out there. It's going to be a real question of, like, how do you get that information uploaded in? How is that passport accepted? Is that accepted by border control, or is that just an airline thing? And what is that standard going to be? So I'm watching that space very closely. I'm a New York City resident. My state has its own passport, and it's the first state to have one. And in a few days, I'm going to be able to download it to my phone and show people in New York State that I'm vaccinated. I don't know what good it's going to do. I will put it on my phone, but that's not going to be accepted by, British Airways for me to enter the UK. So I think IATA seems to really be taking the lead here, but needs to start getting governments behind its product. I think if the European Union were to accept it, that would be a major step forward. Singapore has been a leader here. It's a small city state with a very important airline, and they understand that, and they've taken the lead with this IATA travel passport. Now, the airport experience itself is the other factor to think about. I still remember as a kid going sometimes with my dad to the airport, just walking through security with him and seeing him off on his flights. That ended after 9/11. Then we started getting into taking our shoes off, removing our liquids. Those in the US got known traveler numbers, global entry. We changed our mindset around it and we adapted. And I think there's going to be a further change in our mindset. I mean, we used to go to the ticket counter to check in all the time. Then we got online check-in, then the kiosk, then mobile check-in. So you're going to see much more of that coming. It's just going to be one more thing to check off your passport.
Yeah, I suppose that brings into question what kind of services, and I don't just mean airport, but perhaps airline, even down to cruise line, which I know you report on quite extensively as well. What services are going to come more into focus, into demand as a result? Will we see maybe even new opportunities emerging for travel companies?
Yeah, one of the things that I thought was incredible pivot during the pandemic was Express Spa, which operates, or Express Spa, Minute Spa, these locations in the airports where you could go and get a quick massage. Well, no one was going to do that during COVID, so they quickly turned into rapid testing centers. And as those testing requirements remain. And I hate to say, I think we're going to still be with testing for a long, long time, even with vaccination rates. That definitely becomes a service that's out there. But I think you're going to start seeing more VIP escort services. You've seen the airlines do that for their best customers and sort of formalize that. You've had that in certain airports for years, but I see that type of service increasing, and airports who can facilitate that in a better way will, I think, win over customers a lot quicker. You know, there are certain benefits to flying out of certain terminals with certain airlines because you know you can get through that experience, that terminal experience faster. And then you also know that there are better food and beverage and shopping experiences for you. So, yeah, after 9/11, we all spent a lot more time in the terminals. And I would argue that within 5 years, the retailers finally caught up, you know, leases turned over in airports, and you got a much better experience as a customer. Instead of finding one or two mediocre shops selling t-shirts, you now had high-end boutiques. You could actually spend some time doing shopping and pick up things you wanted to, and the food and beverage service continued to improve with that. I see that continuing. Yeah, there was a big push for local food in airports, good food, getting away from the chains. I see almost that next step of people will want to pause and have a nice meal, set away from others if you can get that, before getting on that plane, because that's the last thing you want to do is eat airline food crammed in a plane with others.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what your view is of what consumers think of the retail and also the dining experience, in particular at American airports today. It sounds like you're perhaps more positive than you would have been a decade ago when it comes to a variety of offer, design, pricing, environment, and other factors.
I mean, I am a horrible critic. I am My years of journalism have made me into a pessimist. So I will walk into an airport and I'm like, oh, look at that. Another cold hamburger sitting under heat lamps that they're charging me $15 for. How dare you? That isn't the case anymore at most airports. You know, you still have a lot of legacy food chains that I think are going to turn over, and you still have a few staples for those who just want a quick bite and that's what they like. But I've seen a really good increase of both fast food and sit down dining at airports. And I think that as terminals get revamped, designers are thinking more and more about that experience. And I do use the word experience on purpose because it is a dining experience on many of these new airports instead of just food to fill you up. And now you're starting to see outdoor spaces pop up a lot more. I mean, Denver International Airport just, opened up outdoor spaces for everyone to access in its new terminal. Denver, of all places, where it's cold and snowy half the year. That's great. It's so refreshing to get fresh air, especially if you're connecting. And I think airport designers need to think more about that. And the pandemic will accelerate that just because people want that feeling of being outside. That's what we've been taught this last year, that indoor is not good. And if I can sit outside and watch planes take off and land, I'd be in love with that. And I will spend $40 for a hamburger for that experience. So please, please open up those spaces.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, and you mentioned the example of Denver, but in North America in particular, where many of our audience are, and even further afield, because you're pretty well traveled on a worldwide level, airports that stand out for you for the consumer experience over there, and what makes them excel and stand out in your view, even just a handful of names, and
Sure.
perhaps even one or two that you could think could do better, perhaps.
Oh, well, I've learned not to say do better because boy, I get the hate mail instantly every time I say that. But yeah, Salt Lake City's new terminal looks amazing. I actually have not been to it yet because it opened during the pandemic, but everything I've heard about it, it just is made with the traveler in mind. I've heard good reviews of the options that are available for food and beverage, even though the pandemic has not let them open at full capacity yet. Um, New Orleans is one that really tried, but you know, it was well publicized. There were a few issues there. I think they've worked through them now, but there were sort of choke points that were not thought through all the way in that airport design. But it's a beautiful facility, and again, the focus on um, local food. And yes, as put in the chat, Terminal B at LaGuardia. I mean, what a night and day experience there. I'm waiting for the final east gates to open there, but I've flown out of the west gates and the central terminal. I've done a few tours of hard hat tours and then opening ones during the pandemic. It's just a space that, like, wow, you wouldn't think of that this is New York. Even the airport clubs, like you sit in the United Club, you're up on a balcony and it's open air, even though it's still inside, but it just feels really good. And the food and beverage options are great. They're more expensive, but they're great. And I'd rather pay 15-20% more for food that is actually good and like I'm getting something. I know I'm going to overpay for food and water and airport. So if I'm going to pay that price, give me something that's really good. Um, yeah, San Francisco, I think, was actually one of the first American airports to start thinking about it with I'm sorry, is it Terminal 2 over there, I believe? Virgin America was one of the tenants, American Airlines there. Little touches like water bottle refilling stations. And we could talk about sustainability later. But like that's just a customer feature that every airport should have. And even if you're not doing a massive renovation, spend a few $1,000 or it's probably a lot more than that to rip out water stations and put in those water refill bottles. Those are the sort of things that people really want. I could talk at length about Asian airports. And how spectacular some of those are. But remember, the funding model there is much, much different. And I don't think that's fair to compare. There's much more of a subsidy out there, while in most of the Americas, we require our airports to turn a profit. And yeah, I'm sure Sean from DFW would tell you about how quickly they'd love to build a new terminal there, but they need to make sure that the economics work there and that the tenants are willing to pay for it and the landing fees there can cover it and not scare away some big clients like American Airlines.
Yeah, well, we'll have you mentioned LaGuardia earlier. We've got LaGuardia Airport partners speaking later in the week on Friday, and we do talk about the new terminal briefly there as well. One of the things that you cover, I know, extensively through the website and blog is this whole question of loyalty and the loyalty of a traveler. What do you think that's going to mean in the new world of travel, and what's going to make those best, and not, I don't just mean airline and airport, but hospitality brands stand out for you?
In the short term, people are going to remember the brands that kind of thought about where the traveler was coming from and just went ahead, extended status, etc. Yeah, I have a friend who used to go every week, New York, London, premium cabin. He has not flown in 14 months. This is a guy who was spending 14,000 a week on flights. Last minute, walk up business class fares. And he got his status renewed and renewed, and he will remember that and he'll come back to that airline. I've had top tier with a lot of the airlines, but I have 4 certificates with American Airlines that are upgrade ones that are going to expire and expire in July. I'm not going to be taking a trip where I need an international upgrade by July. And I feel like American Airlines is just being a little bit stingy on that policy. I understand why they're doing it, but that will remain there. I think there's a halo effect to certain things. Delta Airlines got a lot of credit for blocking middle seats the longest. I think it became a bit of a PR bit at the end, but I think a lot of travelers are going to remember those type of things. When you look at the hotels and the hospitality industry, it's a little harder because elite status is just part of the game. There's a lot more with cleanliness and what are you going to do for me? And I think it's just who handles that right when we come back to those hotels. Do you welcome me back? So nice to see you again. Let me, is this a special vacation for you versus is this a business trip for you? How can I make sure that we make this memorable? I think there's a lot of work that has to be done there for those top tier customers and how to get them going. The cruise lines, that's a whole different ball game there.
The question that came in there from Catherine.
Yes.
Thanks, Catherine, for your question. Just on how you see the comeback for that market. Clearly, we're waiting on instruction for the next phase to begin, but where you see that market going and what the prospects are, even into next year.
So the thing that the cruise lines have to deal with particularly, and I will say airlines have this issue too, not so much with hotels, refunds and vouchers. There are going to be a lot of expiring vouchers for flights and cruises in the near future. And there's still some people who haven't gotten their refunds from a year ago from sailings that were canceled. And that's leaving a really bad taste with consumers. So that needs to be the first phase of it, like making sure that these vouchers remain valid, how to get people back on sailings and use those flight credits. For the cruise business, you're seeing some interesting testing right now. I think it was Royal Caribbean just a few hours ago announced that they're going to do Dominican Republic, Jamaica, and Greece sailings. So all within those countries or leaving from those ports, not visiting other places except for maybe private islands, but a very controlled experience. And in the US, that's getting away from CDC prohibitions on cruises until they can work around that. They're also working out of Florida on some test cruises. It's going to be probably till the end of summer, if not early fall, to see those cruise lines come back at full capacity. What will be very interesting is if you start running cruises out of, let's just say, Dominican Republic, what does that mean for airlift? Do the airlines now need to add in special flights to accommodate 2,000 people who might want to arrive for a Tuesday sailing? And how does that fit into the rest of the flight schedule out there? So I think you're going to see a lot of last minute scrambling. I've purchased several flights for summer and fall. I don't expect any single one of those flights to be the ones I take. And that's because there will be 7 or 8 schedule changes between now and then.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. I mean, just on cruise, it strikes me that the industry, and I know MSC is one of the companies and others have done a lot on their protocols around health, and that, creation of a sense of security is clearly the first and foremost item on the agenda. But it strikes me they've gone perhaps further than even governments were calling for, and that perhaps is the template for a return to safe cruising in particular, is to go one step further than the regulations even call for and self-regulate in a way to make sure that the whole experience on board, from dining to retail to cabins, is as premium, but also as as safe and healthy as it possibly can be, and going the extra mile will probably, for the industry, and given the reputational issues it had a year ago, be pretty important.
Yeah, the cruise line is the cruise industry is very interesting because you have these diehard cruisers who will go anywhere and get on any sailing and are ready to go back. They just want to know there's some steps out there to convince them that it's safe. Then you have the new to cruise market. And this is the most important thing for the cruise industry because they had a record number of new ships on order coming into the pandemic. They were expecting 20, 30% growth within the next 4 years. So you had this massive growth of cruise expected. The only way to fill that was with new cruisers. Now the cruise lines have an extra hurdle to overcome to get those new to cruise folks out on a ship. And the Jamaica, Bahamas, Bermuda type of sailings, that's not going to get new cruisers. That's going to be the loyal cruisers are going to take that extra step of flying there. You need cruise ships back out of Miami, out of Houston, out of San Diego and LA. You need those domestic drive to ports to reopen, or those easy flights to Florida. And that's why the cruise lines are just being so careful. They need to come up with these protocols because the last thing they can afford is any type of outbreak on their ships. It's one thing for 150 people to get on a plane for a 2-hour flight. You sit in your seat, maybe you get up to use the bathroom, but it's very confined. When you start getting into a cruise, that's the whole point of going. You want to mingle with people. You want to meet new people while sitting in the hot tub and having drinks. And that has an inherent risk in it that the cruise lines need to overcome.
Yeah. You mentioned sustainability earlier. Where does that sit, do you think, or where will it sit even going forward post this, in terms of the list of priorities for people as they choose where to and how to travel?
Yeah, it's interesting because the pandemic, I think, has had two very opposite impacts on sustainability. For the airline industry, there's been a complete halt of flying for several months. Now we're getting back up to normal-ish number of flights. We're still way down, but we're getting back to those levels. But all the gas guzzling planes have been retired. This was the great accelerator of jet retirements. The MD-80s went away. I don't think we're going to see many A380s anymore. 747s, there are only a handful left flying commercially. All these big 4-engine planes have gone away, and all the 2-engine, 1980s type of planes like the MD-80 are gone for the most part. So you're going to actually have a much more efficient fleet, and the industry is going to be ahead of schedule, I think, on some of its plans to improve efficiency. You look at the A220, which is coming out, just it's being deployed a lot quicker than people thought it would, and that's going to be a great thing. On the flip side, 2019 was the year that everyone talked about getting rid of single-use plastics. Hotels got rid of straws. Anything that was wrapped in plastic was seen as evil. You didn't want to get on a plane and see your pillow and blanket in business class in plastic. You wanted it clean, and people were doing, who did I fly? I think it was Austrian, had a beautiful cloth ribbon tied around the blanket. So you knew it was fresh. There was a nice piece of paper in there explaining the heritage of the blanket. And it was like beautiful, but there was no plastic. Well, all of a sudden, we're back to plastic on everything. The last thing I want to do is sit down in a restaurant and have real silverware. I'd rather have a plastic knife and fork wrapped in plastic so I know it's been sanitized, given to me. So you've seen a major setback in the industry there in the fight against single-use plastics, and I don't see that changing for a year or two. I'm seeing remote controls are now wrapped in plastic in hotel rooms. So you have these two different fights going on sustainability, and I think it's going to take a few years to sort that out.
Yeah, I suppose more broadly, on the reputational side, do you think travel and maybe aviation in particular has got to sell itself better or differently to become really popularized again? I mean, I feel sometimes the industry, and I include my own country, Ireland, in this here, has been demonized in a way as, oh, it's introducing new disease variants, and we've got pretty much the strictest lockdown rules and quarantine rules in Europe. But even beyond that, you see the idea of rewards for frequent flyers criticized even in some parts on the basis that it benefits a small proportion of the population. I just, wonder, is the aviation industry's voice being heard out there adequately enough, and are its benefits being promoted to the extent that we as a wider industry need them to be?
I think the industry has a long way to go in sort of figuring out how to necessarily promote that. I would love to see more partnerships with rail and bus companies to figure out some of those differences. So, why would you be flying from one place in Europe to another, connecting and having a 2 hour layover or something like that? Let's work together with the rail lines to maybe have a joint ticket with joint checking of bags to get rid of some of those sort of hub and spoke flights. So you're still keeping people on planes where you really need it. But the last thing I want is a 2, 3 hour layover anyway, especially for like a 45-minute flight. I'd rather have a hour and a half high speed train route where I could have it. Now that's a very small number of flights where that situation works. Maybe in Europe it's a little bit better. In the US, it's definitely not a reality. But I think if the aviation industry does better at thinking about the entire journey. So, I know you're talking with LaGuardia partners at some point. Why does LaGuardia not have a rail connection? I know there's politics involved, and I'm not going to blame them of all people, but let's get that rail connection built eventually. And I know that they're working on that. We're still far way away from where Asia is with rail connections, and you really can't even have that until you get new built airports. Denver did a great job with its light rail that comes right into the terminal. It's still not a high speed city center train, and I understand that's not something that will easily happen. But I mean, look at Dulles. Why has it taken so long to get that out there? Like, build that silver line train. It's almost ready, but like that's the sort of thing in my mind that helps with that sustainability argument. That you are taking a mass transit to the airport, at least you're not getting lines of cabs out there.
I suppose just the response there from about LaGuardia is the RFP for rail has been released. So clearly, clearly we have engaged viewers from that part too. I suppose that brings up the question. Just talking about airports large and small. I mean, and airlines, and there's a lot of conversation. I spoke to Sean Donoghue at DFW a little bit earlier about this in terms of where DFW will sit as a result of this crisis. Where do you see the winners and losers emerging? I think within the industry itself, airlines and airports, and hub versus secondary airports, low cost versus legacy airlines, and more consolidation possibly within the industry. And he certainly felt that major hub airports would become even stronger as a result of this. I suppose what would your view be on that, and what the traveler really wants out of the new future?
I mean, of course, Sean said that. I mean, he's got a great hub there, and yeah, it's a great model. Uh, Hub airports will not go away. We've built a system around that, and we need them. And you're going to have a very interesting year ahead for business travelers because particularly in the US, the airline industry has completely redrawn its route maps to help the leisure traveler. So I like to talk about, I'm making these numbers up, but New York to Chicago, there used to be like 35 daily flights between Southwest, Spirit, United, American, and Delta. Every airline had, 7 to 10 daily flights between those two cities. I haven't looked at the schedules now, but I think you're down to like 12 or 13 daily flights. So if you're a business traveler, and you finish a meeting earlier, you don't have as many options as you once had for that. And when you start looking at like DFW, instead of having 4 daily flights out of DFW to some of the smaller cities in the middle of the country, they're down to 1 or 2 these days. At some point, that's got to ramp back up again for business travelers for that frequency. And I don't know which comes first, the return of the business traveler or the return of the flights to make those trips possible. That said, I think a lot of customers are getting used to some of these nonstop flights that hit leisure destinations, particularly from Northeast airports, Washington, Boston, New York, to Florida, to the Caribbean, to Mexico. And I'm wondering if airlines are going to find ways to make those flights profitable again and keep those profitable in the future. So hub airports aren't going away, but I think we're going to see a little bit more point-to-point flying that people will be willing to pay a premium for, like they didn't before the pandemic.
Yeah, I guess bottom line, it's going to be follow what the consumer does, and whatever they demand is the industry's going to have to adapt to. I suppose just wrapping up slowly, Scott, just to come back to the travel experience overall, to sum up, what elements you think will positively differentiate the airport and airline experience in future, do you think?
Looking at the future, I think things that feel clean, feel open, are going to have a psychological impact on passengers. So millions of people who have, I'm going to pick on LaGuardia because it's my hometown airport. People who have not flown out of LaGuardia for a year are going to be surprised the first time they walk into Terminal B. And there's a so first of all, they're going to get excited of like, wait a second, this happened while I've been gone from travel. But second, there's a psychological feeling of open air and high ceilings and not claustrophobia. And I think that the airports and the vendors who have that open space sense in their establishments are going to come out as the winners. So again, coming back to stores not feeling as crowded. It's not just putting down 6 feet little placards on the floor reminding you where to stand. It's maybe clearing out a few of those tables so I don't feel as crowded and that I have to pass people. I just see a mentality of, we can all put up plastic and put out hand sanitizer, but there are other psychological clues that are going to make us feel safe.
Yeah, very good. Listen, Scott, thanks so much for your time and thoughts today. I know we'll be in touch again, and for everyone else, we'll reconvene here virtually, of course, at 1200 Eastern for what promises to be a terrific panel discussion on how we as an industry can and should blend humanization and digitalization. I think there'll be big themes for this week. Meantime, please make sure you visit the exhibition hub open throughout the week, where our exhibitors are all on hand to meet you. Thanks again. We'll see you soon. And thanks again, Scott, for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
Thanks.